Greetings, everyone. This is Richard Pelzer. I'm very, very excited today because we actually have a very good friend of mine that's going to be joining us. But welcome to the space. This is the G Project, and the G Project helps us build relationships and dialogue amongst people of all walks of life. And in order for us to be able to recognize ourselves and each other, it's really great for us to be able to have these dialogues and talks. And this is what the G Project is really all about. I would like to welcome my friend to the stage, Miss Tamecca. Tamecca, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Nice to be here.
Nice for you to be actually here with us as well. So, Tamecca, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you decided to participate in the G Project session with us today.
Well, first, I want to say thank you to you for inviting me. As you know, thank you is a complete sentence to me, and it's, I think, one of the most important verses in a love language. So thank you for honoring me to be a guest on this amazing project. A little bit about me. You know how some people oftentimes answer that question. They say, by day, I'm a lawyer. By night, I'm such and such. So I think that by day, by night, 365 days out of the year, 24/7, I'm an entrepreneur. So I like to identify as a Black woman entrepreneur. And so I have the pleasure of leading an amazing think and action tank called Element 9. And what we do is we primarily work in the public sector with government agencies. And that means that it's my job to assemble amazing dynamic teams. I like to think of my team as a group of ninjas. And I put together all these subject matter experts, and we work on a variety of projects. And currently, one of the things we're working on is food relief here in New York City for COVID-19. So our role is to close the hunger gap. And in other instances, it's to close the work gap or the economic and income gap, public health disparity gaps. And so that's the work that I principally do is Element 9. And
Nice.
through Element 9, yeah, thank you. And through Element 9, I've had the pleasure of also launching some additional ventures, things like Learning Curve, which is a STEAMed entrepreneurship accelerator, STEAM standing for STEM and art and design.
Uh-huh.
And in that, we teach young people how to make and monetize inventions that matter. And then most recently, I've had the pleasure to launch FOLKUS, FOLKUS, which which is a Black design brand. And through this design brand, our initial first product is gift wrapping paper. And pretty soon we'll have some greeting cards.
Very nice, very nice. So I just love this FOLKUS
Yes,
project.
you do.
FOLKUS. So what's the website so folks will be able to check out FOLKUS?
Sure, it's FOLKUS, so folk as in Black folks, white folks, so blackfocus.co. So no com, but co. So focus.co. That's the website.
Very nice.
And you can also find us on Instagram as well and Facebook. And on Facebook and Instagram, we go by FOLKUS Brand. FOLKUS. Yep, FOLKUS Brand.
Okay, cool. So a little bit about the G Project and Immigrants Are Us. Today, there's more than 40 million folks living in the U.S. that were born elsewhere or in a different country. Here in New York, where we are, there are about 38% of the residents and 46% of our labor force were born outside of the U.S. So we have a large immigrant population. So this whole project, it's a public art project that we're actually designing and working on. And the way that it actually really works is if you were born somewhere else and you moved to New York or moved to the US, you're a G0. If you were born here, first generation, you're a G1, second generation, G2, and so on and so on and so on. So our question to you, Tamecca, is what is your G status?
My G status is slightly complicated. I'd say on my mother's side, it's somewhere between a 0 and a 3. My mother is Native Hawaiian.
Okay.
And my father is Black.
Okay.
On my father's side, I can maybe go back about 3 generations to my great grandparents. I think to your earlier opening about the labor force and things like that here in New York City, I would say with my mother's story, my mother was Hanai. And Hanai is a native Hawaiian word that simply means like informal adoptions. And it was something that was used for thousands of years in the ancient Hawaiian culture. But when you fast forward to the 19th and the 20th century with the introduction of new groups that were immigrating there to the Hawaiian Islands to work on plantations, they too leveraged the concept of these informal adoptions. And so my mother, while she is native Hawaiian, was adopted by a Filipino Portuguese family. So I've always identified also as Hawaiian Portuguese. And I think that it's an important story because I think when you think about native populations, both stateside in the contiguous 48, as well as Hawaii and Alaska, it's because of the sacrifices of native populations that they make way for other groups, right, to be introduced to the United States and to that story, and most of which is all centered around work, right? So whether you were enslaved or you came here as an immigrant, but I'm proud to be the great-granddaughter and granddaughter of both Filipinos and Portuguese on my mother's side. And then on my father's side, African Americans out of the South that migrated up to Virginia and to Philadelphia.
Okay, nice. We talked about that this is a public art project. To you, what does public art really mean, and why is storytelling so important here in the US?
To me, public art is the ability to do these like large scale opportunities where people can connect and engage with a particular subject matter, and especially around storytelling. I think unlike the average kind of art that we associate as being kind of closed off in this exclusive museum for the elite, what's beautiful about public art projects is the ability for everyone to kind of engage in the forum, bring something to the table and contribute and add to it. So it's something that multiplies. And so I love that. And personally, I also had the pleasure when Abyssinian Baptist Church, so I live here in Harlem, and Abyssinian is, quote, my home church. When they were celebrating their 200th anniversary, I was part of their StoryCorps project, which, again, you learn so much when you stop and pause and just ask people their story, and you get to learn about them. Like, I learned that, quote, Sister Sheriff was a freedom rider child back in her home and would get up at 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning to get specific Black history lessons that she wasn't getting in her everyday school life. It was also her first introduction to Northern white folks. I mean, all of these kind of eclectic and rich stories only come forth, I believe, through public works projects. So it's important that we fund and we engage these ideas so that we can get to know each other better. I think it's only through art and culture that you really get change magnified, right? That because it storytelling, unlike other mediums, is the one thing that really pulls at the heartstrings as well as the mind, right? It changes mindsets. It tenderizes people's hearts and makes them feel more compelled to, I think, listen and engage and see the human in all of us. Yeah.
Well, as a woman who is an entrepreneur living here in the United States of America, it seems like a lot of your businesses draws on storytelling. It draws on art. It draws on, family and food and a number of different things that you're actually doing. So, where did this actually come from? Was it your grandparents, your mom? Share a little bit about that. I find it to be very, very fascinating.
Sure. So I will say we're focused. Most of that was really art and design driven and looking at how we oftentimes don't realize that there's a story behind that design. And I think for me, as someone that's a collector both of art and artifacts, like, for instance, I love mid-century and, quote, Scandinavian design. But what bothered me oftentimes is how when we think of Black design, it might have this like urban label and being characterized as just strictly urban. And I really wanted to create focus to tell stories and to really think about the prism of Blackness and how deeply it influences so much of global culture. And I wanted the words like Black design to have the same kind of affinity that when we think of people saying like, oh, this is a Danish design or something, I want people to have those same kind of attributions of thinking this is something beautiful, wonderful craftsmanship, and timeless. And so even when I look at some of the designs that's in the debut collection for FOLKUS, for instance, like, I didn't know this until I started researching, but like we have a design that's called Anansi. And Anansi is the Ghanaian word for spider. But the Anansi folklore has been in children's literature, for probably 200 years or more here in North America, so both in the Caribbean. And I didn't realize this. But what's so funny is Anansi is how we get the name Nancy. So Aunt Nancy, Nancy is how it used to be known, right? Even Spider-Man. So we learn that if you're someone that really follows the comics and Disney, you'll find out that actually comes again from Black oral traditions, again, public art. And then I would say with food, again, going back to art and culture, when I think of culture, I think of, again, design, art, and of course that has to be capped off with food. And so for me, I think that there are three things that as human beings we all need, right? We need good health, right? We can't go hungry and we can't be homeless. So the three H's: hunger, homelessness, and health. And I'd like to believe that I can be part of one of those solutions, and that being hunger. And so for me, it's a natural affinity to think about food as a way to engage people. So next month, I'm curating my first art show. And oddly enough, not that I even thought about this before this interview, but I entitled it Last Supper. Mm. So, Last Supper, and it's going to be a show that features the artwork of 13 contemporary Black female artists.
Nice.
Yeah. And so I think about, like, when you think about even that moment of Last Supper, like Mary Magdalene was relegated to the sidelines and is not seen in the artwork of Michelangelo. And I think that oftentimes the voice of Black women gets relegated. If I think about the recent debate between Kamala and Pence and how he tried to quiet and temper her, I think the same thing is true in larger society. And so, I think that there's a way for us to kind of do activism and give people greater agency. And sometimes that's through things like art and culture and food. Like, who wants to ever refuse a good meal, right? Like, this is the one area where we can break bread on, is in food. And so next year, I'm also looking forward to another venture that we're launching called Aloha Micro Markets, which is really going to turn food distribution upside down. And the idea behind Aloha Micro Markets was really inspired by my grandparents. When I was a kid, they used to tell me about the stories back in Hawaii of what is called a manapua man. And so the manapua man or woman would be what we consider today to be the modern food truck, right? Okay. So, if you imagine back in the early 20th century, there were not like cafes and restaurants in a main street, right? So instead, what happened were there's these food trucks that would, show up at plantation sites and other work sites as Hawaii was being built out. And in those food trucks, you would get like a mix of food. So like, again, it's like we think of like the New York store as being this melting pot of things. I think of Hawaii as being the wok, right? Like where you put your stir fry, right? Your chop suey, and all of these ingredients get mixed up. And, it is Pan-Asian, it's European, it's American, it's a lot of things. And so in that, I wanted to bring to life some of those ideas and concepts about easy food distribution, household goods, and the mixture of those things. Because I think Hawaii is an interesting kind of utopia to look at the lens of race and identity. It's one of the few places in the world where everybody wants to be and claims Hawaiian. And so we have to literally be like, oh, are you big N, as in native, as in really indigenous, or little n? And to think that there's even like legislature and policy whereby people that have been there now, say 5 or more generations, are attempting to claim Native Hawaiian status with the little n. So that includes populations like the Japanese, the Chinese, the Filipino people that were like, we've been here when it was no longer a monarchy, right? And so why not recognize our long-term status to the overarching culture that we considered modern day Hawaii? So, again, when you look at Hawaii, people don't realize like the Portuguese bread that you will see at a Black family reunion, the Royal Hawaiian bread and buns that you see, that's a Portuguese thing. It's not, quote, really Hawaiian. Ramen comes from the Japanese, and so on and so on. And I think that this, to me, is, again, it's that bridge. It's the food, it's art and culture. When you make people break bread, you break down walls, you break down bridges, and instead you not break down bridges, but instead you build a bridge, right? So you break down the wall and you build bridges to connect people through those things. Good music, good food, good art, I think always brings human beings together.
Wow, I think that that's actually great. Well, here at Immigrants Are Us, we asked all of our guests if they would be able to bring something. So I wanted to see if you actually have something that you would like to share, such
I
as,
do. So one second, let me grab it. One second.
and while Tameccas actually grabbing it for everyone that's actually watching, we asked that all of our guests to actually bring something, a poem, a picture, something. And Tamecca, what do you actually have?
So this is a portrait of my grandparents. This is George and Josephine Seril, and this is them before they left Hawaii. So the other part of the story is that my grandparents left Hawaii, and in the 60s went to California in search of additional job opportunities and additional type of security. And I actually think it's because of that move that it really changed the trajectory of my family. I think that the paradox again about Hawaii is that, when Native people kind of die off and you bring in this new population, you lose the language, there's a loss of language and culture, and in place you get this paradise, right, that we know and we all love to go on vacation to. But the paradox is that the Native population has suffered in terms of health and economic disparities.
Mhm.
And I think that my grandparents, while they may not have had kind of the language to kind of think about it like that, they were very forward thinking and took the leap and relocated to California. But I think that's true for a lot of folks that were probably born and raised in Hawaii. So many of them end up in places like the Bay Area or in LA and things like that. And oftentimes as far north as Seattle as well. Because there isn't, I think, outside of tourism, there's not a lot of industry in Hawaii. So we have to remember that as well, that it's such a tourism dependent spot, the hospitality and tourism industry there.
So when your grandparents actually came to stateside, or I would say migrated maybe from Hawaii to California, what did they do? You know,
So it's interesting. Before my grandparents left Hawaii, my grandfather did, I think, a variety of odds and ends jobs, but my grandmother had really cemented a great career working for the Honolulu Chamber of Commerce. She loved it. And so for her, it was a big sacrifice to come to, quote, the mainland. And that's so funny. I think if I'm behind closed doors with my family, we always call this the mainland, which is not something I think the average family refers to the contiguous 48 states, but nonetheless. So then when my grandparents relocated to California, my grandmother ended up working initially kind of in LA's fashion industry when they still had the garment districts and things like that, and factories set up to assemble garments and things like that, and or to support the movie and television industry for costume making. So my grandmother did that for a little while. I would say she was like a back office kind of worker. She was not a garment worker, never has been. And then they relocated from LA after my mother graduated from high school. They relocated to Monterey, California, where I was born. So I was born in Monterey, Carmel. And
okay.
there, my grandparents, my grandfather worked ironically, technically in food. He worked at Smucker's. He was a forklift operator. So I grew up always having Smucker's products like Goobers. I don't know if people remember Goobers, but it was the peanut butter and the jelly combined all in the same jar. So you just scooped it all up and in one slather would have the combination. And my grandmother actually ended up, I'm sure she, wasn't happy about it per se, but she ended up becoming a housekeeper in a hotel. But what I took out of that though is that my grandmother, she never forgot her kind of like business and savviness, and really became more like a labor organizer amongst various people in like the hospitality industry. So whether it was like housekeepers and the behind the scenes staff, I feel like she put her mark in the Monterey area around like organizing folks and making folks think about striking and advocating for better work conditions. That's how I last remember my grandmother in terms of her work life, and what she did was really thinking about labor rights.
Wow. That's great. That's great. Well, we are just about to wrap up. So I would like to invite everyone, if you haven't already liked our Facebook page, by all means, please follow us, share the story. Our G sessions. This is season 2. We will be actually going all the way to December 9th. And so we have another amazing story next Wednesday with our friend, actually.
Right.
So
Milton.
Milton, Washington. So I'm very, very excited, and I can't wait till he shares his story. For everyone else, please make sure that you go to thegproject.org. We also have Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And Tamecca will give you the last word if you would like to share or say anything else, by all means. And thank you, everybody else, for watching. Yes, Tamecca.
So I really want to encourage folks to check out FOLKUS.co. And the reason is because we're really looking for new stories and artist submissions. So if you go to our website, at the bottom, you'll find an artist submission. So if you'd like for us to consider your artwork or your stories, pretty soon we're going to have an open call to kind of figure out what should be the next New York paper that we're going to put out. So as you'll see on our website, we did Harlem World with Uncle Richard, with Richard here. And so we're looking possibly to make Brooklyn our next one. So we're looking to hear about what we should include in that. Like, what should the Republic of Brooklyn paper look like? So if you're an artist, if you have a story, we want to hear about your family traditions around gift giving, both traditional and non-traditional gift giving. And we encourage those submissions at Focus.
You give it every day.
Every day, Richard. Like, there's something we should be out there giving folks every single day. So, and again, also, if you have cool products that you want to share with the world, we're looking to partner with great up and coming new brands. So everybody go to Focus and tell us your story, share with us, help us to figure out how we can expand, how we celebrate, cope, and connect with folks.
I love it. Well, thank you very much. And Tamecca, we'll talk soon.
Look forward to it.
All righty. Bye-bye.